Hi, Annie. Thank you for joining me. I wonder if I heard you speak at the International Listening Association, and you spoke about the journey that you've gone through in terms of various medical condition or your medical condition. And I wonder if you could just give a bit of a summary about your journey so far.
I'm happy to, and thank you for having me and having this conversation. I hope that the stories can provide some help to other folks who are going through similar experiences. So my chronic illnesses began shortly after my father passed away in 2010, which was a prolonged and highly stressful time. So for a long time, I chalked up symptoms that I was having to stress, and it took me a while to go and seek out any kind of further explanation than that. And when I did, I was told by the university clinic at the time that they believed I had something called Polycystic Ovarian syndrome.
Okay.
And that happens after a prolonged period of stress, higher stress, which activates a part of your brain that then influences your, it happens to females, influences your hormones to stop being as receptive to insulin. So you become insulin resistant, has metabolic repercussions as well as being subfertile or infertile.
Okay.
And so that's kind of how I operated. So I was trying to adapt to this thing that impacts, what they told me at the time was about 10% of women.
Okay.
And as I was working on that, I had my first full-time job in the career or vocation that I love, which is international education. And I worked there for just under 6 years. And during that time, I traveled to many places.
Okay.
And after those one set of a prolonged travel, I came back and my symptoms worsened. And at first I thought, well, this is just indicative of a big, long 5-month journey and also of polycystic ovarian syndrome. So it's probably nothing to be worried about. But it did get worse. I started falling asleep, driving, showering. I fell asleep during a workout. I woke up on the floor, and that was pretty frightening. So I went to a neurologist, a sleep specialist, and he diagnosed me with chronic fatigue syndrome because I was sleepy and tired but did not have narcolepsy, is how he phrased it. So I operated on that, and then slowly I had more and more autoimmune symptoms that began to flare up, from chronic urticaria, which is hives, which was leaving me close to anaphylactic shock, and they couldn't figure out all the causes of that, and that was sending me to the ER. And during one of those ER visits, they gave me the ultimatum of taking steroids or being admitted and kind of being forcefully given steroids because I had refused, given the polycystic ovarian syndrome, to take them. Given that ultimatum, I did opt in for the steroids to not be admitted and then given them anyway. And I went home, and instead of improving, I got worse. So this amount of time with the autoimmune system spanned from January of 2012 until the fall of 2014. And I started having asthma attacks as a result of the steroids, but I didn't realize the connection at the time. And during that period of a few years, I saw over 35 doctors, given different urgent care, emergency room, and sought out visits with specialists. And once all that happened and I got worse, there was one particular doctor who truly cared. I felt saw me as a person. I reminded him of his daughter, and he worked with me until we found the answer. And when I worsened from the steroids, he had an idea that possibly I had this type of roundworm called strongyloides, which I probably had picked up in 2011 on my travels. But because the symptoms were so gradual, nobody had connected those dots between those two things happening. So as a result, I was so happy, because when you get a diagnosis after being a mystery patient for several years, I was just beyond words overjoyed. I didn't care that there were hundreds of little worms inside my body. I was just so grateful to know what was wrong. So we proceeded with treatment. I was told that I would feel better after about 12 months. And I was really, really happy when that came true. And I felt well for about 8 weeks. But because the parasites had weakened my system so much, I became vulnerable to a new threat. And so after those 8 weeks, I was 28 at that time, and all of a sudden I had a prolonged case of severe mononucleosis, which attacked my liver, which was already weakened through PCOS and having a non-alcoholic fatty liver. And because that happened, I ended up being bedridden for several weeks, actually months. And I had to leave my job at the time, went on short-term disability and left my job. And I'm unable to take pain medicines. NSAIDs I'm allergic to, and because of my liver, I can't take acetaminophen. So I currently still live with a lot of chronic illness and pain. And so there's still some mysteries that we're trying to solve. But I do feel that throughout that journey, I've learned how to better advocate for myself. So it's been looking up.
Lovely. Yeah. Okay, so what I think would be really useful to know is, what are the things that you did that worked well throughout that journey, in terms of also in terms of your communication and the communication that you had with your healthcare providers. So it's kind of what worked well from the perspective of what you were doing.
Yes. Certain things that ended up being very beneficial were learning to be the connecting point, the point of synthesis for the information, because our system is fairly siloed, it's fairly specialized, but we are one holistic body and one human being in one journey. So I learned that I was the only person connecting all of the specialists and connecting all of these different acute experiences. So I began to I created a notebook, and that notebook had all the different test results over time. It had other data points. It also had just my own personal experiences over the course. It was chronological.
Okay.
And this notebook was truly probably in retrospect, a bit too cumbersome. So what I'm working on now, and this has come through speaking with my family, is how to take this very, very large notebook and synthesize that now into either an infographic or something that can nutshell my main points, because although the notebook is a good gauge as to what kind of doctor I'm working with, in all fairness, very few doctors are going to have time to pour through the whole thing. Okay. So that's going to be the next step of that process, is creating something a bit more synthesized than even the notebook was.
So there's sort of more nutshell infographic, possibly,
yes,
and a notebook, but not too cumbersome.
Right, my notebook's very large.
Okay, so finding something more nutshell, and a synthesis and connecting. And is there anything else about the connecting?
Yes, I've learned over time. Well, I used to think that, and I still refer to all my doctors as a team, even if they do or do not work with one another, because they're still the team of people, even if they're working in siloed ways to help me.
Yeah.
That being said, I've also learned that there is a certain amount of navigation I need to do in conversations to explain and connect what other doctors have said that will not appear as insulting the knowledge of the doctor that I'm speaking to at the current time. So if they have an opinion that other doctors have disagreements with, or a different opinion of, I have tried to learn ways to best diplomatically communicate that, to explore other options, or to try to figure out where is there going to be a solution among the varied opinions. And that it feels a little bit that although I'm the patient, sometimes I need to be a counselor, or have a counselor type of speaking about me.
Okay.
To relate to the different personalities. And that's not true of all doctors, but certain doctors I have had, for example, after I had, 4 or 5 doctors all agree that I had this terrible case of mono. I went and saw the immunologist, who, after I had like that piece in my talk where I said, the doctor will see you now, but first you see these 5 other people first. So I had that experience there. And after I saw the 2 residents and 2 nurses, the doctor came in for the last 10 minutes, and the first thing he did is he walked in and he said, "You don't have mono. You're too old to have mono."
Okay.
And then he was kind of done.
Okay.
and so I learned from that process,
Yep.
like, I need to realize, how do I speak to a doctor that has such a strong opinion that disagrees with the 4 I've already seen, so that I, as the patient, can walk away with more tools that will help me cope with my symptoms and cope with my day-to-day management of whatever is going on. So that was kind of the thing that incited my knowing that I needed to do that. And so since then, when I've talked to doctors and I know that there may be a disagreement on opinions, I kind of couch that in counselor talk too.
Okay. When you couch that, and the strong opinion,
yes.
What kind of couch is that?
Well, instead of the first time it happened to me, I was just purely stunned, and I tried to insert really quickly, like, are you truly disagreeing with all of your peers who actually referred me to you right now? And that wasn't the best response.
Okay.
Time. So what I try to do now is I try to listen to the initial thoughts of the physician or the medical person. I take that in, and then I approach it with more questions rather than a statement that may appear to be accusing, like, "Oh, you got it wrong, your friends got it right," versus, "I hear what you're saying. Can you explain perhaps why these doctors interpreted this differently?" And so there's just certain ways that I could phrase things that don't return such a strong opinion with an adversarial sounding, even though that wasn't my intent, but an adversarial sounding rebuttal. So I try to be very careful not to tell anyone they're wrong.
Yeah. So you listen to their initial thoughts, and then there's more questions.
Yes, I've had far better luck with questions than you differ with the person I saw here.
Okay.
Or how you differ with the results of this test, or did you read this test?
Okay, but you would ask more questions.
So questions I've seen those fare better.
Okay, what kind of questions?
Well, for example, if I'm having a talk, and this doesn't have to do with a disagreement among doctors, but let's say I'm having a talk with a specialist.
Yeah.
And that specialist is saying things that I, as a patient, perceive as kind of dismissive, I hear what you're saying, and these tests show X, Y, Z. There's very little we can do, so you basically need to toughen up. This is what a lot of people have to deal with, et cetera, et cetera. I kind of counter that with, I hear what you're saying. I appreciate that. I'm in such admiration of how many people like myself live with stuff like this. That being said, would you, if you were in my shoes, settle on living with something like this? And then I go into an explanation of how it impacts my daily life. I also when I go into doctors like my primary care now, I list out life goals that I'm trying to achieve rather than I'm trying to figure out what's still wrong with me. I say, I'm trying to figure out how I can do field research again, because I'm going to do peace studies in Cambodia and I'm not well enough to do Fulbright. So let's get creative. What are ways you think I can improve my daily life so that I can achieve these life goals? Because at the end of the day, I'm a human trying to live my life. I'm not, a lot of times in doctors' offices, depending on who I've had and how seriously sick I am at the time, I feel more like I'm turned into a problem or a case study, which I appreciate as a researcher because that's what I do. but I still needed to come back to this is a human sitting in front of you that's trying to live their life to its full potential.
And there's a human trying to live your life, and there's get creative and life goals. And more questions. And is there anything else about those questions?
I think those questions have helped me so much, because before, when I first started seeing the volume of doctors that my conditions necessitated, I I was of the opinion and the upbringing that doctors were the experts.
Okay.
I didn't really think of medicine as a practice, but it is a practice, and they
Uh-huh.
don't call it anything else but a practice. So I didn't realize until probably 2 or 3 years in that I needed to participate in the practice for it to work. So I needed to be informed enough to know what questions to ask, because it's impossible for anyone to be an expert just in you. And if you have a very complicated issue going on, you can't be the expert in all the different medical fields, but you can be the expert in your own experience and know what I got a lot better at trying to understand how to articulate symptoms.
Okay.
How to fit in while pushing on the molds that are already there. So something that always puzzles me, but I accept that it's a part of how we do things, is when you go into a doctor, frequently they ask you, what's your pain scale on a scale of 1 to 10?
Yeah.
And 10 being, and this is as far as the explanation has ever gone in my experience, 10 being the worst pain you've ever felt in your life, and 0 being no pain at all.
Yeah.
So that being the only explanation you get of that scale, I would simply answer a number. And because of who I am, and I didn't want to sound like I was complaining, I had all these things going on in my mind. They just simply want information. They're trying to work with a data point. They want you to give you, you to give them a data point. Whereas I do over that question, I'd say, well, how bad am I today? I'm not bad right now, but if I don't tell them the number I felt last night, they're not going to believe me. Or, I haven't had severe trauma as far as, I haven't had several broken bones from a terrible accident. Maybe I don't really know what a feeling of 9 or 10 is. How dare I even claim to have that? So frequently, almost more often than not, I always answered a 5 or a 6 because I felt really sick, but I didn't want in any way to claim that I had the level of pain that people who have had those severe accidents have had. That did a giant disservice to me because I did have a deathly parasite. And for what I needed to get done in the time frame, I didn't realize I was on kind of a ticking clock of when this thing would do me in, because we didn't know what was wrong with me. But for what I needed to get accomplished, I needed not to put that much thought into it. I needed to not compare myself to the rest of the world, people who have gone through severe trauma. And I needed to just, with my own self as a reference point, just say, for me in my life, it's a 7, it's an 8, it's a 9, so that it could have received the attention it needed to be caught earlier.
Okay, so there's not compare yourself and your own self as a reference point.
Yes, instead of I was trying to think of everyone, people who have had to have an amputation, all these things, like how dare I even consider I'd have any pain greater than a 6 ever in my life. And that just did a large disservice to me, because whether I wanted to believe it or not, none of us knew, but I had something that was actually killing me. It just wasn't it was more of a silent killer than in your face. Bad.
And an expert in your own experience, and articulate your symptoms, and informed enough to know which questions to ask, and participate. And is there anything else about participate?
I think, yes. I think another part of participating in its own way was I came to the realization there's a lot I want to do in my life. And if I had just gone with that first year and a half of diagnoses, I could have been someone who said, I guess this is it. The doctors have spoken. There's nothing they can do. This is my new normal, as they were saying to me. And I may have made a lot of concessions in my life for the rest of my life, in my mid-20s, at a level of giving up that I wasn't ready for. And I could, depending on how things had played out, I could have seen myself maybe doing that. I still to this day don't know what solidified me in knowing I was not okay with that, and I would just keep going no matter what. But I could see where that would be so discouraging to some, that you do resign yourself to things that I'm so glad I didn't resign myself to. So the participation part, I think, extends to seeking out things that maybe are a little bit outside of the box. Maybe it's a little bit further. Maybe it's a different specialist. Maybe when I say further, I meant geographically. I kept going further and further away from my home. But just that idea of it's up to you, no matter how many people say no.
Okay.
This is it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's strange to think back on that, which I don't now as much, but to think back that if I had just listened to the two primary care doctors that said my parasite was just allergies, they didn't know better, but they were saying it was allergies and I needed to toughen up. It could have been a really very tragic ending for me.
Yeah.
So that's another form of participating, is just that resilience and not giving up.
Resilience, not giving up, and seeking outside of the box.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else about participate?
Those are the things that come to my mind. Yeah.
And a notebook and infographic.
Yes.
And participate.
Mm-hmm.
And informed enough, and a human trying to live your life.
Definitely a human trying to live my life.
And life goals, and get creative.
Yes.
And is there anything else about what worked well from what you were doing, saying, from what was happening for you?
Well, I do think that I've learned to, some situations you find yourself in when you're seeing many, many doctors, is situations where you may feel, or at least I felt, a little bit not just dismissed, but kind of accused, like, why are you back to see me?
Yeah.
Kind of sense. And I try
kind of a sense?
Just a sense that you're not, you're kind of like a thorn. You're annoying.
Yeah.
you're not an easy case.
Yeah.
I take more of my mental energy. I have, whatever the case may be, dozens of patients to fit in today.
Yeah.
And you're just one person. And I need to use their limited resources, which they do have limited resources, to help as many people as they can. So those of us that maybe have longer term or more complex issues can kind of be like, oh no, they're back. Yes. I still don't have an answer for them. And because that's something it took me a while to realize, so I started reading books that are used in nursing and physician training, because I wanted to understand what they had been taught in regards to bedside manner, in regards to how to do their own time management. I wanted to understand where they were coming from, because as much as I'm a human, they're a human too. And they have to, at some point I realized, like, many have to have some sense of detachment in order to do what they do as a profession, in a care profession like that. So I would say that it helped me to read those books to get a better idea of what medical and nursing students are taught and what their perspectives are. And it helped me to relate to them a little bit better in our conversations. But it also allowed me to push back a bit, to say, I know that I'm not the easiest case, but for example, one of the things that I brought up at the convention was I went back after about 6 months to a liver specialist, and I do not have a liver that functions, but I don't have a liver that merits having a transplant. And in the world of livers, as it has been relayed to me, if you don't fall in the transplant group, it's kind of a live with it. There are not a lot of treatments for a not well-functioning liver that's not, what is it called? Psoriasis? Cirrhosis. Yes, that hasn't had that stage happen yet. Yeah. So I went back, and this particular doctor is one of only a few specialists in the area, so I understand he has a really hard workload. He forgot about me. He forgot to send me for an ultrasound. So when I came into the appointment that day, the nurse said, I'm so sorry, the doctor's forgotten about you. We forgot we had this appointment today. We didn't even get the test assigned to you. So can we meet back up with you in 3 to 4 months? And I did push back. So even though I understand all their different pressures going on in their life, I wasn't okay settling with that. I had already waited 6 months, and I wasn't okay with waiting 3 or 4 more if any answers could have helped my day-to-day life. So I said, I'm happy to sit here with him as he reads my file. I'm happy, I don't mind being there. If it takes a little bit longer, I'm willing to wait, but I don't want to wait months to come see him. So he came in and he was a bit flustered. He was embarrassed that he hadn't gotten his work done. And I was like, it's fine. Just let's work on it together right now. And he read, he kind of skimmed the first couple pages of my file, and he said, oh yeah, I remember you now. You have a really bad liver, and we don't have treatments for a liver like yours. So, I'm done with you, we're done. And I was really taken aback. My mother attended this particular appointment with me, which is another thing. If you have someone like that in your life, I recommend having a friend or a family member come with you.
Yeah.
Because they can remember things you don't.
Yeah.
So many reasons. But anyway, my mother was there, and she looked like she was going to hurt this doctor because people love you and care about you. Seeing someone completely dismiss a loved one is not okay in their book. So she couldn't see her face, but I could. And I was just kind of stunned. And I echoed what he did back to him. And I said, doctor, I appreciate what you're saying, but I need you to now tell me where else I can go, because I can't do that with my body. I live in this. I have to go home in this. I go to work in this. And when I did that hand gesture back to him, echoing his exact words, he was taken aback. He was stunned. He felt really, really bad. He did actually apologize. He rephrased much of the same information back to me, but in a much more caring way, which I appreciated. And hopefully he didn't do that to another patient in the future. I don't know for sure.
Yeah. So there's understanding where they're coming from, and reading books and relate better, and the pushback. And is there anything else about that pushback?
I think the pushback's important. So, I need people to push back on me. So I do work now part-time, and we all need to be challenged. Like, I can understand where the other person's coming from and their workload and things, but it doesn't, at the end of the day, change what they're tasked with.
Yeah.
So it is important, I feel, to push back. So if you do notice that tests haven't made it back to you, or if you do notice that the notes have a discrepancy, I think it is worth calling people out on that and just saying, please recheck this. I've had people write down that I was not allergic to a medicine I'm very allergic to. I've had, in the same doctor's appointment, I've come in with a fever, and I had one type of virus. It was like a stomach virus, and 3 people later in the succession of people that you see in the appointment came in, and they're like, oh, I see that you have a respiratory illness. I was like, no, my respiratory system's fine. But there was a time where I was so submissive and so shy and felt so much like I was a patient and they were the doctor, that I would have just stayed quiet during all of that and nodded and gone home and vented that they got all, these 5 things wrong that day. So I do think it's worth doing the in-person pushback. And I do think more often than not that the people you actually want to be working with accept that pushback as a way that makes them better. Because and if you're working with a doctor that wants to be a good doctor, they want to know if an error like that has been made. Yeah.
And what kind of pushback?
Polite.
Polite? Yeah.
Try to do polite pushback. Polite, but strong, stay strong. But there's no reason not to be civil and respectful and still stand your ground and say, I'm not leaving till this is corrected or until this is answered in a way that I can understand it. So you might have to take a moment to translate from doctor talk to regular day person talk.
Polite, strong. And is there anything else about what's worked well for you in this journey?
I think something I still struggle with, but I'm still think that I've come part way is knowing how to listen to my own body. I like the analogy or the comparison. I think because I worked for so long on a program that was on a ship at sea, I like a lot of analogies that have to do with ships in the sea. And I sometimes think of myself and others going through a chronic illness journey, kind of like Odysseus, stuck out there, exiled to the water. And you have all these different tests and trials that you can come out much stronger and gain all these different skill sets. But yeah, that being said, I think that listening to my body remains a really big challenge. And one of those analogies is the body as my anchor. And when I was healthy, which was the first 25 years of my life, I was one of those folks that liked to burn the candle at both ends. I wanted to do everything I possibly could. I didn't really think sleep was that important. All these different things. And it comes to a point where you can ignore your body. You might not even, I didn't realize I was ignoring my body. But your body will be screaming at you to stop, to pause, to rest, in my case, and to take care of itself. And I think I'm a little bit better at it now. And I have to be, because if I'm not in tune with my body, I will pay far worse consequences in the long run. So if I think, oh, I feel good today, that I start to have hints of not feeling well, I really do need to slow down, or I might be sick for a week. My punishments, my consequences for my actions are tenfold what they used to be when I had a healthy body. And I think one of the hardest things about that is that I no longer fit within what I think are cultural norms of what it means to be a person that looks the way I do, the age that I am, and what I should be able to do every day at the workplace, in my personal life even. And those expectations are hard. They're really hard because I don't want to let anyone down. And I find that folks like myself who I've been talking with, we start to overcompensate quite a bit. We are kind of default in a defensive mode. Because we don't like being questioned, but we also don't want to be pitied. Sometimes we don't really know what exactly we want. But we don't really like saying, hey, I feel really sick today. I'm in a lot of pain. You can't see it, but I am. If you actually get vulnerable enough and transparent enough to share that, say with an employer, and the very first thing that you hear back is, oh, but you don't look sick, you look great. It feels more like an accusation. It feels more like, oh dear, is this all in my head? Or perhaps do I need to prove to you that I hurt? Because I'd rather not. I'd rather pass. But so it takes a lot of bravery to disclose, and I don't know the best answer for that yet. I know people have asked me, they said, well, what would you like the response to be? And I think the people that I've really appreciated so much in my life have changed the whole paradigm, have changed the whole approach to what the default thoughts on that would be. So I had, about a year ago now, a very hard week, and I just I pushed too hard, and I just started breaking down in my office, and I didn't know anybody was going to show up, but this coworker of mine showed up, and I hadn't shut the door yet, and she saw me, and I felt caught in a very weak moment. But she was very kind, and she sat with me, and I told her, this is why I'm not doing well. And I actually explained my chronic illness. I at that point never really disclosed it unless I absolutely had to. And she took it all in, and she started crying because she thought, I had no idea the amount of work you do, the amount of things you do here. Nobody has any idea what you're going through while you're doing that. And the fact that you feel bad about yourself breaks my heart. And she said, I hope one day you work in a place and other people can work in a place where your experiences and skills you have because of that experience are seen as a value added instead of as like a job liability. And when people have that amount of caring, that I realized how much of my reactions are because those very things, because I've had experiences where I felt when I felt forced to disclose, I then felt treated differently. I thought I might lose my job. I thought I wouldn't be as respected. I thought I might be pitied. I thought all these things would happen. And again, it relayed back to, it's not the life I want to live. I don't want to be Annie, the sick girl. I want to just be Annie. And she saw me as Annie. And that was so refreshing. And she didn't come back at me with anything like, oh, have you tried the latest mineral oil? Or have you tried Tai Chi? Have you tried? All these things are wonderful, by the way. I have nothing against any of these suggestions. It's just that too. I was recently talking to a friend of mine who has similar things going on with him. And he said, yes, it gets so exhausting trying to because you feel like you're yet again in a position where you want to make the other person feel better.
Yes.
So it's more of a, that idea is so great. No, I never thought of acupuncture. I'll go try that. I'm sure that'll fix what the last 8 years hasn't. And, but you don't say it like that. You say it in a very nice way because you realize that's their way of caring.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And she just saw you as Annie.
She just saw me as Annie. I had nothing in her eyes changed about me except for positive things. What I saw as such limitations and parts of myself that I try to hide, she saw as strengths, which was just so blew my mind. She really changed my life that day. I was like, it took me a while to process it, but I was like, yeah, she's right. I am different, but it's not all bad.
Yeah.
So,
your strengths. And knowing how to listen to your own body. And what kind of listen is that listen when you listen to your own body?
Many times it's checking in with myself when I wake up and when I go to bed, and just kind of doing a body scan, if you've ever heard of a body scan, but just kind of sitting there and thinking, okay, is anything out of sync? Is anything something I should be aware of? Because when you don't feel well, in my case, like 90% of the time, you start to lose any sense of, so as much as I am listening to my body more, I've lost a sense of when it's bad. Because so sometimes I've let things go too far. Like I've had the flu and I didn't realize I had the flu. I thought I was having a flare-up. Okay. Or so that's the part I'm still working on. But I think doing the body scans and trying to be more, give myself more time to sit still quietly and just try to sense, like, okay, is anything out of place? What is what I usually feel every day versus something in addition to that maybe I need to check out. And the thing that sticks out the absolute most now for me, and this, I don't mean this to sound sad, but is if I wake up, and this only happens like once every 6 months, but if I wake up and I don't have any pain, that really sticks out. It's like, it's like, whoa, it's just such a shocking difference. And you're like, where is it? Where's all that pain? But there was a time I could have said that never happened versus one day every 6 months. So that's still an improvement.
And is there anything else about that listen when there's a body scan and you listen to your body? Is there anything else about that listen?
Well, the only other thing is we're trying to figure out a lot of my things I cope with every day. So my doctor, the same one that found the parasite that I truly respect, I went back to him and I said, I'm still dealing with XYZ. Would you help me? I know you're an allergist, but would you help me? And he said, yes. And so I'm journaling my symptoms for the next 3 weeks. I'll admit it's a type of listening that I do not like.
Journaling?
Journaling. He has me journaling my symptoms related to what I eat, how much I'm sleeping, the times that I eat or sleep, etc. I think it's wise. I think what he has asked me to do is a great way to have follow through with listening to my body, because it will give us comparison points. It won't be as subjective as the here and now and what do I feel right now. That being said, I can't stand it. I do not like it. It's not just that it's one more thing to do in the day. There's something about it that actually angers me, that these things that already take up so much of my life would take up any more time.
Yeah.
That I'm going to sit there, and not only am I going to live through them that day, I'm now going to sit there and write a journal entry about it. And something about that really just irks me. I feel like I'm doing just a lot of times I compare the last 8 years to having, it feels like time has been stolen from me. And it feels like, you know, this extra 20 minutes a day journaling that's being taken from me. That being said, it's wise, and it's another way of listening to my body.
And so is there anything else that's worked well for you in terms of navigating this?
Yes. And I'm going to say this not knowing if it'll work for everyone.
Okay.
But I didn't start being open about all the things that I've been through until about a year ago. So I went over 6 years trying to hide it.
Yeah.
And I would say that inclination within me that compelled me to want to hide it, to the extent I was hiding it every single day I was in public. So when I say hide it, it wasn't to my family. They come with me to doctor's appointments and so forth. But as far as I'm getting my PhD right now, so as far as I was in class or as far as I was at my job, I hid it. And hiding and passing did me no favors. It did me no favors. Because, and it took me a long time to realize this, but if there is somebody out there that is so cruel that they would fire me because of who I am and something that I can't control, even if I'm doing all my work, just because what my work looks like, what my 20 or 30-hour week looks like, can't be sitting at a desk from 9 to 5. It has to be in spurts. It has to be with flex time. It has to be creative. As we brought up before, I have to be creative, but I get my tasks done. So if there is anyone out there that is that narrow-minded or is that stuck on those cultural norms, that my disclosure would endanger my job, and I know that this is far easier said than done, but I'd rather not work for them, because the amount of energy that it further drained from me to pass kept me sicker more often and longer. So I was trying to cover it, and I tried to, not let anybody know that I just had to go to the bathroom for an hour. And what if they didn't see me at my desk? Oh no, they'll think that I was cutting out on the job. And the amount of stress that I felt through that process, it really did me no favors. I mean, maybe it saved face, so to speak, in short terms with certain people, but those aren't the people that I want to work with, because as soon as I started disclosing, which I credit to taking a phenomenology class for my research methods in school, and you have to be very open in that class. And I started disclosing, and I realized that far more often than not that people are carrying understanding. And the saddest thing is there's a lot of us, and we're all trying to pass, and we're all helping this norm of pressure. So I learned how many of my peers, even in my own PhD program, are going through different but similar challenges, and that I, through my passing, and probably even more so because I was overcompensating, was creating an even more stressful competitive environment. So if you can disclose earlier, but it's on everybody's own timeline. I just wish I had done it earlier.
And is there anything else about being open?
I would say it still is important to be kind of cautious. But if there are times that you can get a sense of trust or relationship building and disclose, that it can truly be, at least for myself, cathartic for me, a relief, like, whew, that's off. Don't have to pretend anymore. And what does that mean for me, really? It doesn't, and I try to tell this to anybody who has an experience. I do not want any pity. It's just not having to, with the verbal handshake of how are you today, not having to say, oh, I'm doing great and wonderful. I can just say, you know what, I'm feeling really bad today, but I'm happy to be here. And people just nodding and being like, I get that. And moving on.
Okay.
So I can't say that everybody's the best person to open up to. That hasn't been my experience. And yeah.
So being open.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else about what's worked well for you?
I would say seeking out and finding others like me has helped. It has helped. I don't know the best ways to do that. It's happened organically for me because it's now one of my research interests.
Okay.
So speaking to people with lived chronic illness experiences is part of my research.
Okay.
And I've found that when we talk to each other, it is such a healing process just to not have I can't think of a better phrase than learning curve, but you just kind of meet in a conversation and you get certain parts of it.
Yeah.
And I think it's been very healing for myself and the research participants that I've been working with. Mm-hmm. I personally didn't find a lot of healing when I tried to find these groups on the internet, because you can search out groups on the internet. You type in your diagnosis or what one of your illnesses, and you find others like that. And I'm sure there are great ones out there, but some of the ones I found just felt like a lot was lost. Mm-hmm. With, for example, like Facebook groups. I found a Facebook group and it felt like, and I was on it for several months waiting for something uplifting, but it just felt like a spiraling down in a world of negativity. Like, well, I couldn't get up today. Oh, you couldn't get up today. I couldn't get up all week. Oh, you couldn't get up all week. I couldn't get up. And it was just, nothing felt renewing about it or refreshing, but meeting in person one-on-one with folks and having conversations has felt wonderful.
Okay. So in person,
mm-hmm.
Not Facebook.
Not for me. There's probably good ones.
Yeah. And is there anything else about what's worked well for you?
Trying to think. I do think that I am extremely, extremely grateful for my family. And I had a very special person in my life who's been around for all of this, and we ended up getting married. And it's like my friend, my husband, my mother, certain family members and friends. It's kind of a special gift we've been given to then know who sees us for our strengths at a very deep level. And I would say the other thing is really trying to help change that lexicon, that way of talking about this, so that we can bring attention to it. But also I would love to see kind of like, they have this in other areas of scholarship, but a strengths perspective for those of us, because I think it is so helpful in many ways to view the strengths. And one of the things I write about is kind of this gaining a S-I-C-K, sick sense, and just the different things you learn to do through this journey. And I do think that viewing it as, I have this friend I met at a conference, and he is Native American. He's Ojibwe. And this came up in a conference because a woman was talking about a disability certificate that they were going to begin to offer at their school. But the way she talked about disability as somebody with one felt very objectifying. And it was very much like, this is a population, so this is a demand, so we can make money if we offer this certificate, and these are the things we're going to do. And so I pushed back in her Q&A, and I said, it'd be great if you involved some folks that have this with it in the design process. And she responded with a kind of attack. She responded, I can't think of a better word than an attack, but she said, all of you that have disabilities, you want to call them possibilities or all these, you're not doing anything, not doing yourselves any favors, you're not helping yourselves, and you just need to really cling to the fact that there's something wrong, and then people will help you with it. And this man in the Q&A with me, who we ended up being friends, stopped and said, he was picking apart the words, but he said, in the Ojibwe language, we have no word for disability. It's non-existent. The concept does not exist in Ojibwe language. What the English language calls disabilities, we call gifts. Mm-hmm. And we operate on a whole different thought process because our language is so different. We don't even conceive of it as a limitation or something that's wrong with you. It's just something that is different about you that's actually a strength. So I thought that's another person that like changed my life. I was like, oh. Yeah. So that I hope that can one day be true in English too.
That change in lexicon.
Yeah, that change. So it's not disability, handicap, that it could be viewed in a way that's more empowering. Not that you still don't want to find answers and ways to have more energy and so forth, that it isn't constantly this thing that's wrong with you.
So many things.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else?
I think that's it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing all your stories, your insights. Appreciate it. Thank you.
I appreciate you. Thank you for doing this.